The Black Belt and the Golden Fleece were originally published as one article called The Negro as He Really Is. And at the beginning of the Golden Fleece, Du Bois argues that we should look at the South as it really is, instead of just assuming that we know what's going on in the South. And so the details of his descriptions are to try to give us more of that detail of how things really are in the South. He states that the problem of the Black Belt is one of debt, primarily. The Golden Fleece of the title is cotton, and that again refers to one of the ancient myths of classical literature, Jason and the Argonauts. Jason went searching for the Golden Fleece in order to claim his kingship. And in the South, the king is Cotton, and the quest for the Golden Fleece is less successful. This is Du Bois's description of this quest. Here in 1890 lived 10,000 Negroes and 2,000 whites. The country is rich, yet the people are poor. The keynote of the Black Belt is debt. Not commercial credit, but debt in the sense of continued inability on the part of the mass of the population to make income cover expense. This is the direct heritage of the South from the wasteful economies of the slave regime. But it was emphasized and brought to a crisis by the emancipation of the slaves. In 1860, Dougherty County had 6,000 slaves worth at least $2.5 million. Its farms were estimated at $3 million, making $5.5 million of property, the value of which depended largely on the slave system and on the speculative demand for land once marvelously rich, but already partially devitalized by careless and exhaustive culture. The war then meant a financial crash. In place of the $5.5 million of 1860, there remained in 1870 only farms valued at less than $2 million. With this came increased competition in cotton culture from the rich lands of Texas. A steady fall in the normal price of cotton followed, from about 14 cents in 1860 until it reached 4 cents in 1898. Such a financial revolution was it that involved the owners of the cotton belt in debt. And if things went ill with the master, how fared it with the man? And this description reminds me of the subprime mortgage crisis of 2007 and 2008. In that situation, mortgages were sold to low-income, primarily black and brown borrowers, and then profits were made. The whole business then crashed because these loans were structured so as to continue to rise, and as a result of this kind of debt, people were not able to pay back their loans, and then the entire system crashed. In the Black Belt, the result was that the master went bankrupt as a result of the decreasing price of cotton, and in the Black Belt the result was that the master went bankrupt and left, and the man stayed on, and the debt was gradually offloaded onto him. And Du Bois describes this process starting with sharecropping. Sharecropping is where freed slaves who have absolutely no assets are given a contract for a portion of land that the farmer owns, the white plantation owner owns, and they're allowed to farm on that, but they make less money in their share on that portion of land than the expenses that they have to pay as a result. Extortive prices are paid for goods, and they're only allowed to buy goods at the stores of the plantation owner, and those, because again, there's no money to pay outright for goods, and so they have to also do those on credit, and that also reduces the amount that they gain as a result of their share of the profit from the cotton. And the rent was raised when there was a particularly successful year. So if there was a really good year and you happened to have some extra money, then prices were raised on goods and your rent. And so you just had to pay more. And so there was this constant cycle of sucking the money out and keeping the black farmers in debt in the Black Belt of the South. And all of this raises the question of what the meaning of freedom is. And here is an extended quote from Du Bois, considering what freedom is in the United States and how to consider the situation pre-emancipation and post-emancipation. Away down the Basin Road, where the broad flat fields are flanked by great oak forests, is a plantation. Many thousands of acres it used to run, here and there, and beyond the great wood. 1,300 human beings here obeyed the call of one, were his in body and largely in soul. One of them lives there yet, a short, stocky man, his dull brown face seamed and drawn, and his tightly curled hair gray-white. The crops? Just tolerable, he said, just tolerable. Getting on? No, he wasn't getting on at all. Smith of Albany furnishes him, and his rent is 800 pounds of cotton. Can't make anything at that. Why didn't he buy the land? Huh. Takes money to buy land, and he turns away. Free. The most piteous thing amid all the black ruin of wartime, amid the broken fortunes of the masters, the blighted hopes of mothers and maidens, and the fall of an empire, the most piteous thing amid all this was the black freedman who threw down his hoe because the world called him free. What did such a mockery of freedom mean? Not a cent of money, not an inch of land, not a mouthful of victuals, not even ownership of the rags on his back. Free. On Saturday, once or twice a month, the old master, before the war, used to dole out bacon and meal to his Negroes. And after the first flush of freedom wore off, and his true helplessness dawned on the freedman, he came back and picked up his hoe, and old master still doled out his bacon and his meal. The legal form of service was theoretically far different. In practice, task working or cropping was substituted for daily toil in gangs, and the slave gradually became a métayer, or tenant, on shares, in name, but in labor with indeterminate wages in fact. So think more about what freedom means in political philosophy. What is true liberty in the sense of justice? Are people free if they don't have sufficient income to buy food, shelter, clothes, or some extra to spend on other pleasures or to save for other goals? What exactly is freedom and what is required for justice? Finally, on page 97, Du Bois considers who is to blame for the debt and for the situation of black people in the Black Belt. Yet it is not wholly his fault. The Negro farmer started behind, started in debt. This was not his choosing, but the crime of this happy-go-lucky nation which goes blundering along with its Reconstruction tragedies, its Spanish War interludes and Philippine matinees, just as though God really were dead. Once in debt, it is no easy matter for a whole race to emerge. And here in this passage, is another one of those lovely little nuggets from Du Bois that a whole lot is packed in. So, first considering the position of the Negro farmer as in debt, and he didn't choose this and was given nothing to start by the nation, this happy-go-lucky nation, that goes on, in these other historical references of the time period, the Spanish War going on in the West, Philippine matinees. I'm not even sure what's going on there, but obviously we're involved in the Philippines in some way as well. So you've got this nation that's running around the world looking elsewhere and not paying attention to its own new citizens that it has just supposedly liberated. As if God really were dead, and this is a reference to Nietzsche, who had published his existentialist philosophy around that same time period, and saying, very controversially, God is dead, so Du Bois is highlighting the way in which American extravagances are failing to own up to what he takes to be our moral heritage, and assume responsibility for the injustices that we have perpetrated and for these other beings who are now suffering. And Du Bois, in the next paragraph, looks at various causes for this current situation. So again, thinking about where blame lies, and the default on 40 acres and a mule, which is the amount that was promised to freed slaves. So there was a thought in emancipation that some restitution should be paid to the freed slaves to be able to give them a start on surviving in this nation. And 40 acres and a mule was the amount that was suggested, and that was never brought to pass. So a default on the part of the nation on this promise, exploitive debt that we've already talked about in terms of the merchants and the employers who are exploiting labor in order to keep Black people in debt. And the lack of skills and industry due to the legacy of slavery. So, in fact, Black people could not compete on an equal basis with their white counterparts because they literally don't know any better. They didn't know enough to ask for better housing and for better wages, and didn't have the skills to be able to develop trades and so forth. That's one of the reasons that Washington argues for setting up the Tuskegee Institute to be able to train some of these freed slaves to be able to have trades and be able to escape this economic servitude. The consequence then of this new form of slavery is, Du Bois argues, crime and a cheap and dangerous socialism. So if you're in this position where you're technically free, but in fact enslaved by debt, then what is to prevent you from stealing stuff? And what is to prevent you from a feeling of revolution, of as he says, cheap and dangerous socialism, of wanting to take what the white wealthy landowners have and distribute it among the people who are actually doing the work in the South. For a person stuck in hopelessness, these seem like the only two options, and Du Bois wants to offer the option of education and civilization and self-pride. And so that is why this situation of debt is a particular problem and needs to be rectified.